In 1965, the hugely popular Buick Riviera was reaching the end of its first generation. The luxurious and elegant full-size car was going through a significant redesign for its next model year, and Buick wanted to send off this first generation with a bang. And what they created ended up becoming one of the most sought-after and rare examples of luxury American muscle to this day. It was the 1965 Buick Riviera Grand Sport, and this is its story. See, the Buick Riviera was one of those models that stuck around through multiple generations as a flagship, but to be honest, it sort of dwindled off in its later generations. That first generation though, the 63 through 65 model year Rivieras, was really something special, and it all started as Buick's answer to the Ford Thunderbird problem. By the early 60s, the Ford Thunderbird had carved out a new market almost all to itself, one that General Motors didn't yet have an answer for. Once the Thunderbird added its second row of seats and distanced itself from the Corvette, it firmly dominated that personal luxury category. The T-Bird was stylish, comfortable, and wildly successful. It showed there was a growing appetite for upscale personal luxury cars that blended comfort with performance. GM was searching for inspiration to build a Thunderbird killer, and they ended up finding it when Bill Mitchell was in London. Mitchell was in charge of pretty much all the styling at General Motors, and when he went to London, he saw a custom-bodied Rolls-Royce and decided that Buick needed to make something more like that. Ned Nichols, the longtime Buick designer, came up with the actual sketch for this, which Mitchell approved. In the car immediately, everybody kinda knew it was something special. The first-gen Riviera was just incredible to look at. It was one of the first American production cars to make use of the Coke bottle styling, only a few months after the Studebaker Avanti, which could arguably said pioneered it. Perhaps the best word to describe the Riviera was stately. At first glance it seems squared off and flat, but a closer look reveals a uniquely shaped front end with a tapered center and sharply flared fenders, combining a flat but angled vertical profile with a serrated look from those fenders. The Riviera was eye-catching and aggressive. It also initially came with hideaway headlights, which were awesome, but by 1965, the hideaway headlights were redesigned into the Riviera's most striking and memorable feature, a one-year-only option that is almost as distinguishable as the split window on a Corvette. The 1965 Grand Sport had headlights that, to be honest, you might not have seen if they were hidden, which was kind of the point. Instead of traditional exposed headlights or the in-grille hideaway headlights, Buick engineers went a different route in 65, one that was both elegant and mechanically very impressive. Nestled within the leading edges of the front fenders, these headlights were hidden behind clamshell-styled metal covers that opened and closed vertically, exposing the headlights. When shut, they vanished into the bodywork, preserving the car's long, uninterrupted lines from the nose through the grille along both sides. It was wildly unique, and today it's a hallmark of this car. In fact, these early Rivieras were one of the few cars that GM built in period that didn't have a direct sister car. Its body panels and proportions were almost all unique to just the Riviera, as was its chassis, which was a shorter and narrower version of a standard Buick full-size chassis. Some people call these Rivieras the best-looking Buicks of all time, which might not impress you offhand, but the famous Italian designer Sergio Pininfarina has said it is one of the most beautiful American cars ever built. And to be honest, he would know, given the exceptionally long history of beautiful cars that have worn the Pininfarina badge. On the inside, the Riviera was beautiful and comfortable, with individual bucket seats for both the back and front areas, power adjustments for the seats, with beautiful wood grain accents to back it all up. It was a comfortable, roomy cabin that also sported a big trunk behind it. The Riviera was a winning combination of plush appointments and sinister style, and when it all came together in 1963, sans the clamshell pop-up headlights, as those were only available in 1965, it left quite the mark. The early cars brought with it the iconic 401 cubic inch Buick nailhead motor, which was good for 325 horsepower backed by an automatic transmission. It was a solid performer out the gate, but the best was yet to come. In '64, Buick upped the ante. They introduced an optional 425 cubic inch version of the nailhead, producing 340 horsepower. It was a meaningful step forward, and for most buyers, 340 horsepower was definitely enough. But there was one other engine option that was tucked into the options list that was even more serious, and they called it the Super Wildcat. This was a new trim level of that 425, with dual 4-barrel Carter AFB carburetors, revised internals, and a much more aggressive mapping. The Super Wildcat was the first real signal that Buick wasn't afraid to chase muscle as well as manners. You wouldn't stick two 4-barrel carburetors on there if you weren't looking to go fast. And by '65, with the first generation Riviera heading for redesign the next year, Buick saw an opportunity to not only showcase their most powerful version of the car, but to wrap up the first generation with something truly special. The result was the Grand Sport package of Rivieras, of which just 3,354 would be made. The Super Wildcat motor that was fit into these was a beast. It put out 360 horsepower at 4,400 RPM and a tire-smoking 460 foot-pounds of torque at 2,800 RPM. As a large luxury car, the Riviera was heavy at over 4,000 pounds, but even with that weight, the Super Wildcat-equipped GS's could get to 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds and clear the quarter mile in 15.4 seconds, all done through a smooth Super Turbine 400 3-speed automatic and a 342 rear axle ratio with posi traction, which was standard on the GS Rivieras, although you could option other ratios for the rear gear set if you special ordered them. For a luxury car, it compared very favorably with other muscle cars of the time. For example, the Chevelle SS 396 Z16 of that year, with 425 horse and 415 foot-pounds of torque, did 0 to 60 a little bit quicker at 6.5 seconds, and the quarter mile similarly at 14.9. The '65 GTO had an option for similar horsepower, and compared to the Riviera, the GTO did 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds and did the quarter mile at 16 seconds stock. The T-Bird had a 410 horsepower option at the time, but it was still 400 pounds heavier than the Riviera GS, which did not help its comparison. It turned out, even as a luxury-focused car, the '65 Riviera Grand Sport was competitive with a lot of straight-up muscle cars on the road. Only the highest power options from other manufacturers could really hold a candle to it, and its extreme low-end torque helped to make up for its relatively high weight. It wasn't just all power though. When Cars magazine got their hands on the '65 Riviera Grand Sport, they came away impressed, not just with the power, but with how well it handled. For a car of this size, it defied expectations in the corners. The body was solid, the frame was pretty stiff, and the ride was surprisingly composed and comfortable, especially over rough pavement. It was by no means a sports car, but for the period, it did not wallow like one might have expected from a full-size American coupe either. And all that credit goes back to Buick's engineering and the Grand Sport handling package, which included firmer springs and shocks, a quicker steering ratio, and a ride that was dropped by about an inch. These ended up being subtle yet effective changes. Stopping power came from some of the biggest and baddest drum brakes of the time. By modern standards, these weren't stellar or anything to really brag about, but for '65 they were pretty adequate. And reviewers noted how confidently the Riviera slowed down when prompted. These Grand Sports weren't just a performance badge though. Buick needed to do a little bit on the exterior to make sure they looked the part. They had custom chrome-plated wheel covers, unique Super Wildcat valve covers, and a bold twin snorkel air cleaner with the bright chrome and signature badging to let you know inside the engine bay that there was something real impressive in there. And since these were limited production models, it was exclusive enough that Buick included a metal owner's plate, which you could send off to Flint, Michigan to have engraved with your name, which was a subtle, personal touch in an era when brand loyalty still really meant something. After 1965 though, the iconic first generation Riviera was redesigned and replaced with the second gen of cars, which kept the hideaway headlights, just no longer in that super cool 65 model year form. There was then the iconic, yet very divisive boat tail Riviera that followed after this in the third gen of Rivieras in 1971. But as the platform kept on evolving more and more away from its original design shape and ethos, it kept losing a little bit of what made that first generation of car so special. The masculine, stately, and intimidating gentleman's coupe transitioned into a football shape by the late 90s, before it was killed off altogether, which cemented these first-gen Rivieras, and primarily the 1965 GS cars, as the pinnacle of not only the Buick Riviera, but also the American luxury muscle car. And that concludes today's video. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please consider smashing that like button and subscribing to the channel to get alerted for our regular uploads. But otherwise, I will see you all in the next one, enthusiasts.